CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. President Biden is asking Congress for $33 billion to support Ukraine, a dramatic increase of US funding.
The war is an absurdity in the 21st century.
The United Nations chief denounces the invasion of Ukraine as he arrives for talks with President Zelensky.
President Putin warns any country trying to intervene in Ukraine will face a lightning-fast response.
It's the great energy dilemma. How does Europe wean itself off Russian fossil fuels when it's still Moscow's biggest customer?
And the US economy shrinks by 1.4% in the first quarter, an abrupt turnaround as coronavirus disrupts businesses. US President Joe Biden is asking Congress for a further $33 billion in support for Ukraine. He's also announced plans to seize the foreign-held assets of Russian oligarchs to assist in the relief effort.
While the majority of this cash is earmarked for military spending, $3 billion will be used to ensure food security and humanitarian support as the invasion enters its third month.
This so-called supplemental funding addresses the needs of the Ukrainian military during the critical weeks and months ahead. And it begins the transition to longer-term security assistance that's going to help Ukraine deter and continue to defend against Russian aggression. This assistance would provide even more artillery, armored vehicles, anti-armored systems, anti-air capabilities that have been used so effectively thus far in the battlefield by the Ukrainian warriors.
The United Nations Secretary General is in Ukraine for talks with President Zelensky. Antonio Guterres has described the invasion of the country as an absurdity in the 21st century.
His visit is expected to concentrate on the humanitarian response to the war. Well, let's talk now to the Associated Press correspondent, John Gabrel in Lviv. John, what else has Guterres been saying?
The Secretary General today traveled just north of Kiev to several of the cities that were held by the Russians for several weeks after they launched the war in February. Now, the Secretary General did find himself surrounded by burned out apartment buildings. He went to Bucha, which was the site where Ukrainian officials say they later found the bodies of civilians dead in the streets, some dead from close quarters gunshot wounds, others with their hands tied behind their backs. He also visited a church where there was a mass grave. This all comes as he is preparing to meet President Zelensky, but while he was there, the scene clearly moved him, and he had some pretty harsh words directed at Russia. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I fully support the International Criminal Court, and I appeal to the Russian Federation to accept to cooperate with the International Criminal Court. But when we talk about war crimes, we cannot forget that the worst of crimes is war itself.
John, realistically, what are the Ukrainians expecting from this visit?
Well, President Zelensky had been a little upset that Guterres went first to meet with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Now, though, it likely will turn their attention to Mariupol. Now, that's that city on the Sea of Azov in the south where there have been fighters and civilians at this embattled steel mill. Now, this steel mill is the last position that the Ukrainians hold in the city. Recently, that has been targeted by a series of just pounding airstrikes from the Russians. Satellite photos analyzed by the Associated Press showed that one central facility where those people believed to still be there are hiding in these underground bunkers had been just hit repeatedly. Video released showed them in dire circumstances with dust in the air, struggling to survive. And what likely will happen is the Ukrainians will go forward and probably ask the United Nations and perhaps the International Red Cross to offer some sort of corridor to allow those still inside to escape safely.
And what's the latest on the ground?
We've seen continued shelling in the eastern part of Ukraine. Now, this is the area where the Russians have really focused since pulling back from their initial advance towards Kiev after being blunted by the Ukrainians. Even now, just in Lviv, a couple of minutes ago, we did hear air raid sirens, but we haven't heard any explosions or anything of the sort.
John, thanks for that. John Gambrell from the Associated Press in Lviv. Well, NATO's Secretary-General has praised the European Parliament for its support for Ukraine.
Jens Stoltenberg is in Brussels. He says NATO allies are preparing to deliver more modern military equipment for Ukraine. Well, our correspondent Trent Murray is following the story for us in Brussels. Trent, what else did Jens Stoltenberg have to say?
Yeah, Robin, the NATO chief has spent much of today in these closed-door meetings with European lawmakers, essentially giving them an update on NATO's support for Ukraine and really trying to stress that NATO does want to work in lockstep with the European Union. Of course, both organisations in their own ways working very hard to support Ukraine and provide increasingly strong military weapons, including tanks and artillery from EU member states. But it really was Finland and Sweden that took centre stage today during questions to Jens Stoltenberg. Of course, those two countries are European Union members, but they are not NATO members. They've really resisted that question for decades, instead preferring to be neutral. But what has happened is both Helsinki and Stockholm in recent months has seen what has happened in Ukraine. And frankly speaking, they have more or less decided that they now want in with NATO. And it certainly seems that both sides are working quite hard now on getting their application together. Let's just have a listen to what Jens Stoltenberg had to say about the prospect of the two Scandinavian nations joining the defensive alliance.
We are in dialogue with Finland and Sweden, and it's their decision. But if they decide to apply, Finland and Sweden will be warmly welcomed and expect the process to go quickly. And then I'm also certain that we will be able to find arrangements for that interim period between Finland and Sweden applies and until the formal ratification is finalized in all 30 parliaments. So I'm confident that there are ways to bridge that interim period in a way which is good enough and works for both Finland and Sweden.
And Trent, is there concern about how Russia might respond?
Well, there certainly is, Robin, and that is because you only have to look at recent statements from the Kremlin over this very issue, and it is very clear to see that Russia does not want this to go ahead and that they would be quite upset if it does. In fact, a Ministry for Foreign Affairs spokesperson said just last month that there would be, quote, serious military and political consequences if Finland and Sweden join NATO. And then just last week, we heard from the Kremlin's official spokesperson saying if this does go ahead, then Russia would have to, quote, rebalance the situation. Now, for Finland in particular, this is an issue. It shares about a 1,300-kilometre border with Russia. That is why if you listen to that statement from Jens Stoltenberg, the language was very particular because there is some concern about what would happen in the period if the two do decide to join, the period between application and ratification. In other words, that window when the paperwork is being assessed by NATO. Now, Finland and Sweden are concerned that that could leave them exposed, that period. It could leave them open to some sort of Russian response without the full protection that comes with being a fully fledged NATO member. Jens Stoltenberg really keen to stress today that the alliance should be able to find some sort of workaround there to offer them protection while their application is being assessed. But it is one to watch, Robin, because certainly the mood here in Brussels is that we do expect an announcement from Stockholm and Helsinki really any day now. It seems that that certainly is the trajectory the two countries are heading on.
Trent, thanks very much. Our correspondent Trent Murray there in Brussels.
China says it'll cut import tariffs for coal to zero from next month. Beijing hopes it'll increase coal buying and improve energy security. But analysts expect the policy to have limited impact as China's domestic coal output stands at record levels while prices have surged to historic highs.
Indonesia has imposed a ban on palm oil exports. The country is facing a domestic shortage of cooking oil as well as soaring prices. Consumers in several cities have had to queue for hours to buy the essential commodity at subsidised rates. Indonesia is the world's largest producer of palm oil, and the ban risks destabilising a global vegetable oil market already hitting record prices.
Barclays has put its $1.25 billion share buyback plan on hold due to a costly trading error in the United States. The British bank says it sold $15 billion more in US investment products than it was permitted to. Barclays says it's found no evidence of deliberate misconduct and is working with regulators.
Boeing's CEO says the company should have refused a deal in 2018 with former US President Donald Trump over Air Force One. The firm has lost a total of $1.1 billion in costs related to the contract, which involved converting two 747 airliners for the White House.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why tension surrounding the export of fuel isn't confined to Russia. We're in Spain to explain.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
Look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mom is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bring all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world, on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Germany says it's preparing for the possibility that Russia might cut off its gas supply.
Chancellor Olaf Scholz was speaking during a trip to Tokyo, where he met the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Both leaders said they're working to reduce their country's dependence on Russian energy.
If and what decision the Russian government will take, one can only speculate, but it makes little sense. One has to prepare for it, and as I said, we had already started to do this before the war broke out, and we know what we have to do, and that is exactly what we will do.
Poland has called on the European Union to penalise countries that pay for Russian gas in rubles. It follows reports that some European energy firms are preparing to comply with President Putin's demands.
Critics say Moscow's payment system will undermine EU sanctions, threaten the EU's unity and deliver billions in cash to Russia's war effort. Russia's move to cut supplies to Poland and Bulgaria has added new urgency to Europe's plans to end dependence on Moscow. Our business correspondent Juliet Mann has the story. Juliet.
Thanks, Jamie and Robin. Well, if Vladimir Putin was looking for a pretext to cut off countries that have supported Ukraine, their refusal to pay for future supplies in rubles rather than the standard dollars or euros, could be it. Now, as we've told you many times before, Russia is the largest supplier of energy to Europe, providing 40% of Europe's gas and 25% of its oil at a cost of $850 million a day. Now, analysts say a total energy cut-off, gas and oil, would throw Europe into a recession. The Bruegel think tank says Europe would be 10 to 15% short of its usual supplies to meet next winter's heating demands. The situation is serious enough that Germany has declared an early warning of an energy emergency. Now, Poland is further along reducing its reliance on Russia and says for now they're not concerned about the embargo. Russia is still sending gas to Germany, Austria, Hungary and Slovakia, where some of Europe's largest energy companies are reportedly preparing to use the new payment system for Russian gas demanded by the Kremlin, including Austria's OMV and Germany's Uniper, which has just confirmed it will switch to paying in rubles. Italy's Eni, another of Gazprom's large customers, is also reportedly evaluating its options. But you know what? Cutting off Europe's natural gas doesn't benefit Russia either. Gazprom already sells 80% of its foreign earnings for rubles, making the boost to Russia's currency minimal. Now, Russia has continued to profit from its stranglehold over Europe's energy supply. In the past 2 months, so since the start of the invasion, EU imports of Russian fossil fuels were worth about $46 billion, so 71% of overall exports. A report by the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air says an increase in prices is what's offset any reduction in volume. Well, Laurie Mullaverta is the lead analyst behind the report.
So from tracking Russia's fossil fuel exports over the past 2 months, we estimate that the total value of coal, oil, gas exported was $67 billion, which is more than a doubling from the same period last year because of the very high fossil fuel prices. And so that has resulted in a big windfall for Russia, in spite of the attempts of many countries and many buyers to switch away from Russia in response to the invasion of Ukraine.
So you talk about a windfall. I mean, to be clear, if fossil fuels are funding Russia's war chest, which companies, which countries are paying for it?
The European Union was responsible for 70% of these imports, so worth about $46 billion over this 2-month period. Germany was by far the biggest importer among these countries, followed by Italy and then by China. In terms of companies, because of the very high gas prices, it's really the biggest gas importers that are also the largest companies behind these staggering sums. Major gas utilities in Europe, such as Uniper, RWE, are going to be some of the biggest ones. We also found out that many of the major international oil companies, such as Shell and BP and Total, were still doing business in these fuels.
You talk about that EU reliance on Russian energy. They've pledged to reduce it by 2/3 by about 2027. Individual countries are also working at different paces to reduce their reliance on Russian oil and gas. How realistic are all of those goals, especially when it comes to replacing supplies with alternatives?
If you look at the EU's response in terms of changing energy plans, the increased ambition for renewable energy in many countries, in some countries for nuclear power, for energy efficiency is very impressive. And over the next 3-4 years, that is going to make a big difference if those ambitions are realized. The main problem that we're highlighting with the report is that in terms of resolving this crisis, we don't have years. So it's also important to take action that affects Russia's export revenues now and creates pressure on Russia to resolve this crisis.
So, bringing it to the here and now, what could change this picture?
The EU is currently debating an oil embargo. That would make a big difference and should certainly be on the table. Over this year, the EU is also looking to import more from other sources, but because of the gravity of the situation, we do also need to talk about saving energy, so simply reducing consumption. This would help lower the prices, which this would make this would create more pressure on Russia, and it would also alleviate the burden on those low and middle income countries that are being affected by the high prices.
So save energy, find alternatives, and maybe an embargo on oil. That was Laurie Muller-Verter from the Centre for Energy and Clean Air. Jamie and Robin, back to you.
Juliet, thank you very much. Well, gas supply rows are not confined to Russia. Spain could be facing a major gas shortage. Algeria says it'll cut supplies if Madrid decides to divert its gas to other countries.
That's after Spain said it would supply Morocco with gas. It's also supported Morocco in a territorial dispute between the two North African countries. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak is in Madrid. So, Rahul, how significant is this threat by Algeria?
Very, Robin. I get to talk to you. Algeria supplies Spain with around 40 to 50% of its liquid natural gas. So Spain, unlike many of its European neighbours, not really reliant on Russia. I mean, it gets around 7 to 8% of its liquid natural gas from Russia, but most definitely reliant on Algeria. Now, that gas used to be delivered to Spain via Morocco, and that was until last year when Morocco and Algeria broke off diplomatic relations with each other. That was partly over Morocco's decision to normalise their relations with Israel, and that dispute, as you mentioned, over the Western Sahara, which Algeria say should be independent. Morocco say it's their territory, but they have offered the region autonomy. Now, following that, Spain and Algeria started to fall out. Spain decided to support Morocco's claim to Western Sahara and for them to get autonomy instead of independence. And that came after Algeria said they would deliver their gas directly to Spain. But Algeria got so angry about that, they recalled their ambassador from Madrid back to Algiers. And as you say, though, the biggest sticking point is this issue of Spain giving the oil that they receive from Algeria, diverting it to other countries. Basically Morocco. Now, Spain insists they're not doing that. They are giving liquid natural gas, to Morocco to give it energy independence, as they say. But they say it's absolutely not coming from Algeria. But Algeria, frankly, losing patience, and it's resulted in this threat. And that's all it really is. It's definitely a threat, a very serious threat. And I think you're seeing countries like Algeria with high levels of liquid natural gas. They're really trying to use that gas wealth to flex their muscles on the diplomatic scene, especially at a time when the demand for liquid natural gas is so high, in Europe especially.
Meanwhile, Rahul, the Bulgarian Prime Minister is in Madrid after Russia cut off its gas supply. What's he hoping for?
Well, the EU, you may remember yesterday, were very quick to show its solidarity with Bulgaria and Poland as well after the actions of Russia. Many EU leaders, including the Spanish Prime Minister here, Pedro Sanchez, using the word blackmail to describe Russia's actions. But that support, whilst very welcome, is really secondary to what President Ruben Radev really wants. He's really looking for more concrete assurances from Spain, from its EU neighbours, maybe in terms of more financial assurances, maybe in terms of finding a way to replace liquid natural gas from Russia, because you've been talking about earlier in the programme, Western Europe talking about trying to wean themselves off the need for liquid natural gas from Russia. Well, in the case of Bulgaria, they're not weaning themselves off. They need to go cold turkey. They are so dependent on Russian liquid natural gas, and of course that supply has gone now. They're going cold turkey, and they won't be able to do that alone. Robin.
Rahul, thanks very much. Rahul Pathak there in Madrid.
Well, the Russian invasion has put the brakes on Japan's used car dealers.
Russia is Japan's largest market for second-hand vehicles, but the war has disrupted trade, leaving cars stuck in Japan.
Our correspondent Phoebe Amoroso reports now from Tokyo.
thousands of kilometers from Europe, Japan's used car exporters are feeling the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. For Yamagen Corporation, a Tokyo-based exporter, Russia is their biggest customer. Last month, sales dropped sharply.
When the war started, orders from Russia dropped by 80 to 90%. Since the end of March, business has been recovering, and just in the past couple of weeks, we've been getting the same amount of orders as before.
The recovery of Russia's currency, the ruble, has helped restore demand. But the future is far from plain sailing. Insurance companies in Japan have stopped covering routes to Russia, and that sharply reduced transportation options.
Japanese shipping companies used to transport most of our cars, but they stopped their routes to Russia. This is our biggest problem. If the sanctions against Russia are lifted, I believe they will start those routes again. However, we don't know when that will be, and it's not something that we can count on. I believe we'll have to develop new routes, for example, via China.
Russia is a driving force in Japan's used car market.
Japan exported over 1 million used cars last year, worth about $4.8 billion. And Russia was its largest market, accounting for 15%.
When exports stopped, the Japanese market was flooded with vehicles, putting downward pressure on prices. For domestic buyers, the situation has provided some relief. The pandemic disrupted supply chains, exacerbating a global semiconductor shortage and cutting automotive production. That saw a surge in demand for relatively new used cars, which sent their prices surging too. New car production is still being scaled back, but exports of used cars to Russia are restarting. Analysts say it's not clear where Japan's second-hand car market is headed. The war could bring further supply chain disruptions, and Japan has pledged to fully cooperate with G7 countries on sanctions, putting its trading relationship with Russia under strain.
The number of used cars exported to Russia is more or less recovering due to the stabilization of the ruble. But other factors we do need to consider are the sanctions. We can now receive payments through small and medium-sized financial institutions. If no further restrictions are implemented and if the ruble continues to be stable, used car exports to Russia will continue.
There's cautious optimism for Japan's exports, but the road ahead is far from clear. Phoebe Amoroso, CGTN, Tokyo.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. COVID made us think more about our physical health. Why so many of us are getting sweaty down at the gym.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. President Biden is asking Congress for $33 billion to support Ukraine, a dramatic increase in US funding.
An absurdity in the 21st century. The United Nations chief denounces the invasion of Ukraine as he arrives for talks with President Zelensky. The United Nations chief has said his trip will focus on creating humanitarian corridors in the besieged city of Mariupol. Meeting Guterres in Moscow on Wednesday, President Putin said he was willing in principle for the UN to play a role in evacuations.
Hundreds of civilians and Ukrainian troops are believed to be sheltering inside Mariupol's Azovstal steel plant. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Will Denslow in Riga. Will, there are signs of the Russian bombardment intensifying and now a warning from Moscow to Western governments.
It's absolutely right. Of course, Secretary General Antonio Guterres arrived in Moscow earlier this week, saying that he wants to be a messenger for peace. But the rhetoric we're hearing out of the Kremlin since he departed Moscow has been very much counter to that kind of narrative. We heard from President Putin where he said that if Russia felt their security was threatened, that there would be lightning-fast retaliation. He said that effectively he had the tools that were unlike any other power had at its disposal. He said he didn't need to brag about them, that he would simply use them if required. So very strong message coming out of the Kremlin this week, and that has been a point very much reiterated by Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for Russia's foreign ministry.
This criminal activity of the Ukraine armed forces in Russian territory cannot go unanswered. Kiev and Western capitals should take seriously the statement by our country's defense ministry that further inciting of Ukraine to strike at Russian territory will definitely lead to a tough response from Russia. And the presence of Western advisors in the Ukrainian decision-making centres will not necessarily hinder that response.
Well, away from the war on words, the focus remains on the situation in Mariupol.
Jamie, that's absolutely right. Of course, as you rightly mentioned, that intensity of shelling that is being reported on the ground. This comes just days, really, after Moscow itself said that it wasn't doing any of the fighting, that civilians could leave. They also accused Kiev of using human shields in the area, which is, of course, something that Kiev has vehemently and adamantly denied doing, blaming Russia for the lack of humanitarian corridors that are in effect. We've also heard from the defense minister in Kiev saying that they're expecting to see an intensity in Russia's fighting in the east of the country, saying that Russia seeks to cause as much pain as possible. Of course, while Russia has denied being the protagonist when it comes to the escalation in violence in Mariupol, reports on the ground at least paint a very different story.
There has been no order yet to leave positions or to leave the area. We received an order to defend the city and we keep defending the city. We keep fighting. Of course our resources aren't infinite and they are running lower with every passing day. The situation is difficult, but we're going to battle and fight on for as long as we have to.
And we've heard from the UK's Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who says that he believes that Russia could essentially dig in, especially in the east of the country. He has likened Russia's incursion to a cancerous growth. Jamie?
Will, thanks for that. Will Denslow, our correspondent in Riga.
Ukrainian refugees trying to enter the United States should find the process easier from this week after new immigration systems were implemented.
But for thousands of people who travel to Mexico hoping to cross the US border, the process there has become more complicated. CGTN's correspondent Alistair Baverstock explains.
Irina Arnautova from Mariupol in Ukraine didn't make it to the US border in time. She and her family arrived in Tijuana 24 hours after the humanitarian parole protocols changed, no longer allowing them to enter America simply by presenting a Ukrainian passport.
Really, I'm lost because we just arrived and there is no way to go and we don't know how we will leave, how we will survive. And it's from the one side is scary, but from the other side is so much tiredness and there is no, the head is not working to think about what you will do.
At this camp that housed Ukrainian refugees waiting to cross, 82 didn't make it in time. Tijuana's Migrant Services Director says one option for them is to stay in Mexico.
They're welcome here. There's a lot of employment opportunities, and we can help them with their Mexican paperwork, but the decision is up to the Ukrainians.
However, settling down in Tijuana may not be the most appealing option. Tijuana is one of the world's most dangerous cities, with human and narcotics trafficking, both serious issues here, which led to more than 2,000 murders last year. Not an ideal place to remain for Ukrainian refugees who only travelled here to cross a US border, which is now closed to them. Those who still want to enter the US will now have to apply through the United for Ukraine programme, which asks for a lot more paperwork and, above all, a US sponsor who will vouch for friends and family seeking to enter.
This new program is hard because for people who don't have friends or relatives in the US, it's difficult. In 2 days we need to go to Mexico City and we should be there for further news.
As Ukrainians who didn't make it in time head to Mexico City, their American dream on the other side of this wall looks further away than ever. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, Tijuana.
The United States economy unexpectedly contracted 1.4% in the first quarter of this year. It's an abrupt reversal for an economy coming off its best performance since 1984 and raises fears of a recession. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Tarrant, who's in New York. So, John, this was a surprise drop in US first quarter growth, wasn't it?
Yes, and I know what you're all thinking over there. You're thinking, oh, no, America is about to collapse. There was an unexpected decline in GDP. Well, you know, it certainly was a surprise. I mean, if you just listen very carefully, you actually won't hear what we normally hear in times of crisis, which is the masters of the universe up there on the space frame, which is the thing that carries all the wires here, and we have to coax them down. We say, no, don't jump, it's going to be okay. We give them a cup of tea and they're fine. Well, they're not doing that today, and there's a very good reason for that, because this is only the first read of the GDP figure. It was a surprise, though. You are right about that. You are absolutely right. It was down 1.4%, and Wall Street economists have been expecting it to be up by about 1%, and this is the first decline that we've seen in growth in the American economy since the second quarter of 2020, and that was the absolute height of the COVID crisis. Now, what is GDP? Well, it's growth, and if you put everything that the country produces into one basket, private companies, public companies, overseas companies, some government institutions and agencies, give it a big stir, then that's what you get, the total output for the country. And it was down in the first quarter. Now, the problem with this kind of issue is it's very difficult to imagine. It's very hard because the stuff is complicated. But we are told that some fixed investments were down. Defense spending was down, which has surprised a lot of people given everything that's going on with the special operation in Ukraine. And there's record trade imbalances, including with China. But you could boil it all down to 3 words: 40-year inflation. That's basically it. Because the same report shows us that consumer spending was up 3% in the first 3 months of the year, but inflation was at 8%. So it totally eradicates everything. And we haven't seen this for years and years and years. We literally haven't had this kind of inflation in the economy. Now, as I say, it is only the first read, okay? So they do a second one, and it's quite possible that they will revise it. It may even just be in the green at the end of that. And they jolly well hope so, because they think that demand is strong, jobs are certainly good here. That means that there's low unemployment at the moment, and the supply chain issues appear to be getting sorted out. But if they don't, then there will be a recession if there's a negative set of growth figures in the second quarter, because the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. So everyone's hoping that doesn't happen, and certainly everyone's eye here on Wall Street and in Washington is on the November midterm elections, which are crucial.
There has been a sigh of relief, though, hasn't there, after those Meta earnings we were waiting for?
Yes. Yeah, well, I was down there on the floor. We get to go on the floor in the evenings here when the Meta earnings came in, and there really was a palpable sort of exhaling of the air, and the stock of Meta platforms went from like 8%, 12%, up to 18% before I left here last evening. And the reason is, last time round, the Meta earnings had this huge decline in what they call daily active users, and that was a real shock, first time ever, and the stock price has never really properly recovered from that. Well, then yesterday the story was that the monthly active users declined. That's not very good, but it's okay. The forecast for the rest of the year was a bit weak, particularly in the second half of the year, but the daily active users were up. Not much, but they were at least up. And Wall Street here has taken that as a sign that there is still growth possibility in the economy, despite the inflation that we were talking about. And PayPal had some similar earnings as well, though their growth is the lowest it's been in about 5 years. So we had Meta up 18% yesterday before I left here. Now it's up 14%. PayPal is up 3%. And Twitter has just reported its earnings as well, and they weren't half bad either, with their daily active users, which are the ones you can really monetize. That's why they're so important. Twitter shares are up about 0.7% at the moment, at around $49. And just quickly, we're getting word that some of the staff at Twitter are very unhappy about the Elon Musk takeover. And Truth Social, which is President Trump's own version of Twitter, is now #1 in the pop charts when it comes to downloads. And we think that that is because of all the hype surrounding Twitter. Guys?
John, good to talk to you. Many thanks. John Terrett there in New York.
Turkey's President Erdogan is in Saudi Arabia to try to repair diplomatic relations and boost trade. It's his first trip there since the killing of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Saudi's Istanbul consulate 4 years ago. The trial of the suspects accused of taking part in the killing has been transferred back to Saudi Arabia as Turkey seeks to try to draw a line under the assassination.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he wants to create what he called Britzeland after welcoming the Swiss Prime Minister to Downing Street. The two countries are working towards a trade deal, which the UK hopes will open up the Swiss market to its businesses. Both countries are major exporters in the services industry and are not members of the European Union.
Israel has come to a standstill as it marked Holocaust Remembrance Day. It commemorates the 6 million Jews killed by the Nazis during the Second World War. A 2-minute siren brought much of the country to a standstill. Pedestrians paused along with buses and cars as drivers stood on the road with their heads bowed as a mark of respect.
Denmark has become the first country in the world to suspend its COVID-19 vaccination programme, saying that the virus has been brought under control. More than 80% of Danish people have received 2 doses, and more than 60% of the population have also received the booster. But officials say they do plan to restart the vaccination programme in autumn.
COVID-19 has brought a renewed interest in our health, and in China that's included an increase in physical exercise.
Many more people are now going to the gym, some for the first time. CGTN correspondent Lu So-rae reports.
Going to gym may not be as popular in China as it in many other Western countries, but that's slowly been changing over the past years, partly thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many new gym goers hope to boost their immunity from COVID-19.
I have come to exercise for 5 months and have achieved good results. Since the pandemic, I have reminded myself the importance of improving my physical strength. I think I will keep up this habit from now on.
In fact, more parents are sending their children here for physical exercises. They want their children to lay a good foundation of their physical health.
Also, having to stay at home due to COVID restrictions, many people have been turning to indoor aerobic activities. Over the past few weeks, millions of Chinese have been doing aerobics through a method created by a singer Liu Genghong from Taiwan, who uses the Jay Chou song Compendium of Materia Medica. It's proving to be very popular, with the number of users continuing to rise. It highlights the growing appetite for fitness in Chinese society. But experts say much remains to be studied over the exact connection between physical exercises and the ability to deal with infection. So far, positive correlations are mainly observed in animal experiments. What we have known is that overexercise could induce too much stress hormones, which will suppress the function of the immune system as a result.
Scientists who study immunology, nutrition, and the lifestyle will have to work together to better define a set of parameters that the general public can use to gauge what level of exercise they themselves need to maintain a well-being. I think we are on the way to that. It's not yet.
Lucy Ray, CGTN, Beijing.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, we're on top of the world with climbers helping scientists gather climate information, collecting samples of ice and snow.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The French here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
It's the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front clear line. view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
This week on Razor, new and not so new treatments for neurological disorders from depression to dementia.
Exercise promotes nerve growth factor. It promotes cardiac function and circulation to the brain. It also reduces cardiovascular risk factors, which in and of themselves may contribute to Alzheimer's disease.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Scientists are conducting the most comprehensive research in decades on Mount Chumolongma, or Everest. For the first time, they'll collect geographical and climatic data from the top of the peak at more than 8,800 meters above sea level.
But they didn't embark on their journey unprepared. To ensure the success of the mission, they've solicited the help of a veteran mountaineer. CGTN correspondent Taiyuan reports.
It's the highest point on Earth, Mount Chumolongma on China's Tibetan Plateau, known internationally as Everest. Every climbing season from April to May, hundreds of mountaineers gather here at the base camp, 5,200 meters above sea level, for a chance to stand on top of the world. De Ting-No Zhu is one of them.
I grew up in a township at the foot of Chumolongma.
I yearn to reach the top. I'm very grateful that there is such a big force of nature in our Tingru County. Without it, I probably would not have so many rich experiences.
Experiences that others dare not dream of. De Ting has conquered Chomolungma 4 times. In 2008, for the Beijing Summer Games, he was part of a team that escorted the Olympic torch to the summit. This time, he's on a new mission. He's leading a team of 14 to collect weather data and ice and snow samples from the world's tallest peak.
This is unprecedented from a scientific perspective.
Zhao Huabiao is a meteorologist who needs this kind of data. Most scientists like him are good mountain climbers themselves, but the Chomolungma summit is known to be elusive, even to the experienced.
We've been in close communication. We teach them how to set up and operate equipment, as well as the precautions, so the installation process will go smoothly.
De Ting himself is not just a trained climber. With a master's from China's University of Geosciences, while mulling on a doctorate, he's considered a first-generation mountaineer/plateau scientist in China. He leads rounds of rehearsals, making sure no detail is overlooked, including how to bag a section of ice core, a water bottle standing in for the real thing.
The equipment we used in the past were a challenge to high-altitude research work because they were big and heavy. Now we have the best, lightest, and most convenient equipment.
The team ascends from base camp. Each of the 14 teammates shoulders 5 kilos of equipment on top of their supplies and oxygen. In a week, De Ting is set to stand on the top of the world for a 5th time to uncover for the first time some of Earth's highest secrets. The team will have a 1-hour window before harsh conditions kick in.
But once the wind gets too strong, it will be very dangerous. Our hands and feet will become susceptible to frostbite.
Dangers he knows all too well. He tells me how he once almost lost a finger.
After about 1 minute of exposure, my finger became numb and pale because it lost blood supply. It was frozen. On my way down, I knocked it on the rocks until it started to bleed.
Now that fingertip is hardened and has lost its print, a reminder of the risks of the job. But he says he's living his dream.
I don't think I'm risking my life. It's an adventure. With every climb, we prepare and we plan. We are simply exploring the scientific possibilities of the future.
Well, let's take you to Venice now, where Chinese artist Wallace Chan is opening his latest exhibition at the Venice Biennale.
His sculptures are meant to represent a fragmented world, but as he tells our correspondent Hermione Kitson, a sense of isolation when he was a child helped him hope for a brighter future.
Wallace Chan says the magic of Venice and its artistic history provides the perfect stage for his exhibition Totem.
Totem for me has been a symbol of hope and power. From an early age, I've been curious about the micro world and the macro world. In this exhibition, where I have my 10-meter sculpture unassembled, I hope that people can walk through the body of the sculpture and discover another kind of language to communicate with my work and the materials.
The Titanic sculpture in its many parts reflects the social fragmentation and uncertainty in the world today and is inspired by Chan's Buddhist faith and curiosity in nature. It also echoes his personal and artistic journey from poverty and isolation to a life rich in experience and recognition.
When I was small, I moved to Hong Kong. I couldn't speak Cantonese for a long time, so I lived in my imagination and had no contact with other people. Living in my own world, I paid close attention to everything, even ants and flowers. I was quite frivolous at that time because I used to block ants with sand. I found that an ant managed to march on despite obstacles. It gave me strength in my heart that one day I too could find a way to break through and get people's attention.
Key to Chan's ethos is coexistence as he becomes one with the materials he works with. Over the past 5 decades, he's created some of the world's most expensive jewellery and invented the revolutionary Wallace cut.
I invented Wallace Cut in 1987. I was inspired by a multiple exposure image in a photography exhibition and thought how wonderful it would be if gemstones could achieve the same result. I learned about gem cutting over a decade later and found that one inclusion in a gemstone could project more inclusions in the front. From then on, I started to study how to cut a gemstone and succeeded. Wallace Cut is based on reverse thinking. Left is right, shallow is deep.
Chen says he doesn't gauge his growth by success, but by his evolving creative process.
I don't have the word success in my heart and my future. I only know that I must keep learning. If I don't learn, there will be no tomorrow. I keep learning and practicing so I can improve myself. I will then become more knowledgeable and capable every day. Creation has become my everyday assignment. I live to create.
The Totem exhibition will be in Venice until the end of October. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Venice.
The headlines again. President Biden is asking Congress for $33 billion to support Ukraine, a dramatic increase in U.S. funding.
Our other headlines: an absurdity in the 21st century. The United Nations chief denounces the invasion of Ukraine as he arrives for talks with President Zelensky. His comments come as the UK's Foreign Office confirms that a British national has been killed in the fighting and another is missing.
And the United States economy shrinks by 1.4% in the first quarter, an abrupt turnaround as coronavirus disrupts businesses.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Preview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.